to my little friend.
Say hello to my little friend. Scarface wasn't just a gangster film. It was a cultural earthquake, raw, dangerous, and dripping with excess. What audiences saw was Al Pacino's Tony Montana carving his way to power with blood and cocaine. But behind the cameras, chaos reigned. Cuban refugees, real DEA surveillance, actors overdosing on set, and fights over censorship. This isn't just a story about one of the most quoted crime films in history. It's about what Hollywood hid behind the neon lights and bullet-riddled walls. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 20 weird facts about Scarface that reveal production disasters, dangerous stunts, clashing egos, and shocking real-world consequences. And wait until the end, because the bonus fact is something even hardcore fans of the film almost never talk about. Let's dive in. The real Cuban refugees on set. When Brian De Palma needed extras for Scarface's chaotic opening refugee camp scenes, he didn't rely on Hollywood background actors. He pulled from real Cuban refugees who had just arrived in Miami during the 1980 Mariel boat lift. Many weren't actors at all. They were desperate men trying to rebuild their lives. Some had even been released from Cuban prisons. This decision gave the film its gritty authenticity, but it also brought risk. Tensions on set ran high, with some extras clashing with crew members over money and treatment. It wasn't staged chaos. It was reality bleeding onto celluloid. For Pacino and his co-stars, every glance at those faces was a reminder. Scarface wasn't a fantasy. It was ripped from the headlines. The movie blurred lines between fact and fiction in a way few crime films ever dared. Al Pacino's burnt hands. The climactic shootout, with Tony Montana wielding his M16 grenade launcher, came at a brutal cost to Al Pacino. While firing blanks during one intense take, Pacino grabbed the scorching hot barrel of the weapon. His hands were severely burned, sidelining him for 2 full weeks of shooting. Instead of halting production, De Palma used clever camera tricks and stunt doubles to keep filming moving. Pacino later joked that the pain became part of Tony Montana's rage. But the accident was no small mishap. It left Pacino with scars and a newfound respect for just how dangerous pretend violence could be on set. What audiences didn't know was that behind Tony's roar of "say hello to my little friend" was an actor literally pushing through fire. The chainsaw scene nearly went too far. The infamous motel chainsaw sequence is one of the most shocking moments in Scarface. But what viewers don't realize is how close it came to being unwatchable. De Palma originally filmed the scene with far more explicit gore, blood spraying, flesh tearing, and brutality that left the crew shaken. The Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, nearly slapped the film with an X rating, which would have killed its box office. De Palma fought, tooth and nail, cutting frames strategically while still leaving the audience feeling the violence. What remains is suggestive horror. You never actually see the saw enter flesh, but your imagination fills the gap. It's a masterclass in psychological brutality. Not too graphic, but terrifying enough that audiences still squirm 40 years later. Pacino's voice permanently changed. Al Pacino threw himself so completely into Tony Montana's Cuban accent that it had a lasting effect on his voice. He worked with dialect coaches, studied real Cuban immigrants, and spoke in Tony's gravelly growl even when cameras weren't rolling. The strain shredded his vocal cords, leaving him hoarse long after filming wrapped. Some colleagues even claimed his natural voice never fully recovered. What audiences didn't know is that Tony Montana wasn't just a performance. It was a possession. Pacino's commitment created one of cinema's most unforgettable anti-heroes, but it came at the cost of his own vocal health. That guttural snarl? It was as much pain as it was performance. Oliver Stone wrote the script while battling cocaine addiction. The screenplay for Scarface wasn't penned in comfort. Oliver Stone, who adapted the 1932 original into a modern cocaine empire saga, was deep in his own battle with addiction at the time. He admitted later that he was hooked on cocaine while writing the script, traveling to Paris to detox and finish the work away from Hollywood's temptations. That raw struggle bled onto the page. Every paranoid rant, every desperate grab for power, every nose full of white powder came from a writer who knew the high and the crash personally. Scarface wasn't written from research alone. It was written from experience. That's why the dialogue still feels so electric, so manic, so brutally alive. The real DEA kept watch. While Scarface was filming in Miami, the Drug Enforcement Administration was already concerned about how realistic the production looked. With Cuban refugees, prop cocaine everywhere, and real gangland locations, federal agents worried that the movie could attract actual cartel involvement. Rumors spread that real drug lords were keeping tabs on the set. The DEA even stationed agents nearby to monitor activity, just in case the line between Hollywood and the underworld blurred too much. For the cast, the tension was palpable. They were actors pretending to smuggle cocaine, while real smugglers lurked in the same city. What audiences didn't realize is that the fantasy world of Tony Montana was playing out against a backdrop of actual law enforcement paranoia. The film didn't just depict the drug war, it became entangled in it. Michelle Pfeiffer was nearly rejected. Today, it's hard to imagine Scarface without Michelle Pfeiffer's icy performance as Elvira Hancock. But at the time, Pfeiffer was virtually unknown, and producer Martin Bregman didn't believe she had the presence to play Tony, Montana's glamorous, drug-addicted lover. Al Pacino wasn't thrilled either. Pfeiffer had to fight tooth and nail for the role, beating out established stars like Glenn Close and Gina Davis. She arrived on set skinny, fragile, and determined to prove herself. Pfeiffer later admitted she practically starved herself to achieve Elvira's skeletal look, surviving on minimal calories. The result was haunting authenticity. Her glassy eyes and frail body weren't just makeup, they were real. What was almost a lost opportunity became one of the defining performances of her career. The cocaine was baby powder. Tony Montana's empire was built on mountains of cocaine, but of course, the cast wasn't snorting the real thing. Instead, the white powder on set was powdered milk and baby laxative. Even so, endless takes left the actors coughing, sneezing, and gagging as clouds of the stuff filled their lungs. Pacino joked that the substance nearly killed him more than the bullets ever could. Crew members reported leaving the set covered in a fine dusting of fake cocaine after long shooting days. The powder became its own character, coating everything, props, costumes, and even the actor's skin. What looks like glamorous excess on screen was, in reality, a constant struggle with a set that literally choked the people who worked on it. The Miami backlash was fierce. Scarface's depiction of Cuban immigrants as violent drug dealers infuriated Miami's Cuban-American community. Local leaders argued that the movie slandered refugees who were trying to build better lives in America. Protests erupted, and officials tried to block the production from shooting in the city. Brian De Palma was forced to relocate many scenes to Los Angeles, disguising Hollywood neighborhoods as Miami streets. Even decades later, some Cuban-American groups still resent the film's portrayal of their community. Ironically, the same movie that enraged Miami became a cult classic in hip-hop culture, where Tony Montana's rise-from-nothing story inspired generations. The backlash was real, but so was the cultural impact. Scarface became both hated and worshipped, an outsider film embraced by outsiders everywhere. Pacino trained with real gangsters. To embody Tony Montana, Pacino didn't just rely on dialect coaching. He met with real-life Cuban immigrants and even gangsters who shared their experiences of hustling, smuggling, and surviving Miami's cutthroat drug world. Pacino studied their body language, their swagger, and even how they handled weapons. He wanted Tony Montana to feel authentic, not like a caricature. Some advisors even coached him on how a gangster would look at another man, how he would dominate a room without saying a word. Pacino absorbed it all, bringing a chilling realism to his performance. Go ahead and like and subscribe, because Pacino's method immersion wasn't just impressive, it was dangerous. He wasn't just acting like a gangster. For months, he lived as one, and the results still unsettle audiences today. Steven Spielberg directed a scene. Yes, you heard that right. Steven Spielberg quietly stepped behind the camera for one sequence in Scarface. Visiting his friend Brian De Palma on set, Spielberg was invited to direct a shot during the climactic mansion shootout. He staged one of the moments where Tony's enemies stormed the staircase. Though Spielberg's contribution was small, it's a fascinating footnote. One of cinema's most celebrated directors briefly left his stamp on one of the most violent movies of the 1980s. What's remarkable is how seamlessly his work blends into De Palma's operatic style. Most viewers will never know where Spielberg's hand begins and ends. Scarface wasn't just De Palma's vision. It became a strange tapestry woven by some of Hollywood's greatest minds, even if only for a few frames. The MPAA ratings battle nearly sank the film. The Motion Picture Association of America nearly killed Scarface before it reached theaters. De Palma's first 3 submitted cuts were slapped with an X rating due to extreme violence and drug content. An X rating meant no major theater chain would touch it. De Palma argued fiercely, backed by producers and even a few sympathetic industry insiders. He claimed the film wasn't glorifying drugs, it was condemning them. After heated negotiations and minor edits, the MPAA finally relented with an R rating. Ironically, De Palma later admitted the cut they released was almost identical to his original. The changes were more about politics than content. What audiences didn't realize is that they were inches away from never seeing Scarface in theaters at all. It was nearly banned by Hollywood itself, the real-life hitman consultant. To make the violence authentic, producers brought in consultants with actual underworld connections. One of them, according to crew whispers, was a former mob hitman who advised on how executions were carried out. He corrected actors on how to hold weapons, how to intimidate without words, and even how to make a killing look spontaneous. His presence rattled some cast members, who realized the film wasn't just pretending at brutality, it was borrowing from real, blood-soaked experience. Pacino later remarked that Tony's ruthlessness drew partly from these conversations. What audiences didn't know was that Scarface was shaped not only by Hollywood imagination, but by voices who knew firsthand what it meant to live and die by the gun. The mansion wasn't in Miami. That lavish mansion where Tony Montana made his last stand. It wasn't in Miami at all. The exterior belonged to a Spanish-style estate in Montecito, California. The interiors were built on sound stages in Los Angeles. Miami officials had rejected many of De Palma's filming requests due to protests, so the crew recreated the city's neon glow on the West Coast. Ironically, Tony Montana's supposed empire in Florida was born in California soil. Audiences bought the illusion so completely that many still believe the mansion stands somewhere on Miami Beach. It wasn't. The blood-soaked staircases and bullet-riddled walls were Hollywood architecture, fragile sets that were torn down once filming wrapped. A fantasy empire built on plywood and plaster, destroyed in fire and blanks. De Palma's camera crew nearly mutinied. The intensity of Scarface's production didn't just wear on the actors, it nearly broke the crew. De Palma's demand for long takes, intricate camera moves, and endless retakes left operators exhausted. The shoot stretched late into the night, with call sheets rewriting themselves daily. During the brutal shootout scenes, some camera crew members complained about unsafe working conditions, blank cartridges exploding inches from expensive lenses, and, worse, their faces. A few threatened to walk off unless safety improved. De Palma, relentless, pushed forward. The irony was sharp. A film about power and control nearly lost control behind the cameras. What audiences didn't see were the men behind the lenses, sweating, ducking, and risking injury to capture Tony Montana's violent downfall. Pacino's stunt double took a bullet. During the mansion shootout, Al Pacino wasn't the only one taking risks. His stunt double, who handled the most dangerous falls and explosions, was nearly killed when a squib misfired. Instead of detonating outward, the explosive charge sent shrapnel flying dangerously close to his body. Crew members rushed in, convinced he'd been seriously wounded. Miraculously, he escaped with only burns and bruises. Pacino later admitted he felt guilty watching someone else take such risks in his place. The chaos wasn't staged, it was real. Every gunfight sequence pushed the limits of safety, blurring the line between controlled stunt and uncontrolled disaster. What audiences didn't know was that behind Tony Montana's blaze of glory stood doubles risking their lives for the sake of cinematic immortality. The sound of cocaine snorts was a studio trick. One of Scarface's most disturbing details is the endless sniffing of cocaine. But those sounds weren't real. Sound designers had to get creative, using a bizarre mix of crushed cornflakes, powdered sugar, and even flour being inhaled through straws to create the sickly realism. Engineers layered the sounds to make each snort echo like a desperate gasp. The result was a symphony of addiction, raw, unsettling, and unforgettable. Every time Tony Montana leans into his desk piled with powder, the sound effect drives home the mania of his rise and fall. Audiences squirmed because it felt so authentic. What they didn't realize is that the audio wasn't just background. It was psychological warfare, designed to make you hear Tony's destruction as much as see it. Tony's desk had hidden messages. That iconic desk, piled high with cocaine and guns, wasn't just set dressing. Production designers slipped hidden details into the office decor to reflect Tony's psyche. The globe emblazoned with "The world is yours" wasn't just a prop. It mirrored the blimp Tony had seen earlier, symbolizing his obsession with limitless ambition. Even the patterns on the walls echoed imperial designs, like he was crowning himself king in a palace of powder. De Palma encouraged this visual storytelling, layering symbols that would only be caught on repeat viewings. What audiences didn't realize was that Tony's office wasn't just a room. It was a tomb, built as both a shrine to his ego and a coffin for his inevitable downfall. The film's reviews were brutal. When Scarface hit theaters in 1983, critics hated it. Roger Ebert praised it, but many others dismissed it as vulgar, excessive, and needlessly violent. Some even called it garbage cinema. Pauline Kael described it as cartoonish, while others accused it of glorifying drug lords. Universal worried it had backed a flop. Audiences were divided too. Some walked out during the chainsaw scene. Yet over time, the film rose from the ashes of criticism, becoming a cult icon. By the 1990s, thanks largely to hip-hop culture, Scarface transformed into a symbol of ambition and survival. What audiences didn't know on opening weekend was that this so-called disaster would eventually be enshrined as one of the most influential crime films ever made. Pacino was obsessed with the role for life. Al Pacino has played many iconic roles, but Tony Montana never left him. Friends said he would slip back into the accent years later, quoting lines at parties. Pacino himself admitted that Montana was always with him, like a ghost haunting his career. He never reprised the role, but he celebrated its cultural legacy, appearing at screenings, tributes, and even referencing Tony in interviews. For Pacino, Scarface was more than a movie. It was a turning point. It wasn't his biggest box office hit, but it became the role that defined him for generations. What audiences didn't know was that for Pacino, Tony Montana wasn't just a performance. He was a permanent presence, burned into his life as much as his career, the hip-hop resurrection. Here's the shocker. Scarface might have faded into obscurity if not for hip-hop. In the late 80s and 90s, rappers from Nas to Jay-Z to the Ghetto Boys adopted Tony Montana as a symbol of survival, ambition, and power. Posters of Tony's mansion and the "World is Yours" slogan decorated countless bedrooms. The film's VHS release exploded in sales, fueled by this cultural embrace. What Hollywood critics once dismissed as trash became sacred text in another world. Scarface wasn't resurrected by studios, it was resurrected by the streets. The irony is brutal. A film that condemned excess became an anthem for it. Without hip-hop, Tony Montana might have been forgotten. Instead, he became immortal. Scarface wasn't just a gangster epic. It was a cursed production, a cultural lightning rod, and a film that lived a second life far beyond theaters. What audiences didn't see was the sweat, blood, protests, and near bans that shaped every frame. If you loved uncovering these secrets, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and remember, when it comes to Hollywood legends, the world is yours.